Learning disabilities, abbreviated as LD. Subscribe, like and share so that you can receive notification for future videos. Today, we will talk about the definition, characteristics, identification, prevalence, causes, educational considerations and transitions for learning disabilities. Starting with the definition. A learning disability is a disorder in psychological processes involved in understanding or using language, which may be manifested in problems with listening, thinking, speaking, reading, writing, spelling, or doing mathematical calculations. Each of these areas has its own label for that type of learning disability. Learning disabilities do not include a disorder associated with hearing, vision, motor problems, intellectual disabilities, development delays, or emotional behavioral disorder. So let's look at some of the characteristics. Previous labels for learning disabilities including slow learner, minimally injured brain, perceptual disabled, or dyslexic. Dyslexia is a severe disability in learning to read, particularly as it relates to the coding. This graphic is a severe difficulty learning to write, including handwriting. Dyscalculia is a severe disability in learning mathematical concepts and computation. Dyspraxia, difficulty in performing complex movements including muscles, motions needed for talking. And auditory processing disorder is where there is trouble distinguishing cellular sounds or confusing the sequence of heard or spoken sounds. Non-verbal learning disabilities are the inability to recall names or words for common objects. Finally, visual perception or visual motor deficit is the inability to differentiate between foreground and background, as well as similar looking numbers, letters, shapes, objects, or symbols. Problems may include habitually skipping over lines of text. So, how do we identify learning disabilities? Here are a few red flags. The child may guess constantly while reading. Perhaps they have difficulty understanding and following directions. They may speak well but read poorly. Possibly they have extreme difficulty with maths. Perhaps they confuse similar words and letters such as B and D, P and Q, or with words that are similar such as was, saw, or so on. And no, another red flag, difficulty expressing thoughts. Let's look at few more red flags. A child may have trouble understanding time and distance or have difficulty memorizing words or basic maths. They may also have short attention spans or get distracted. They may have poor learning strategies. Perhaps they are overactive, inactive, or just unmotivated. And finally, they may be confused left, right, up and down before seeking a diagnosis or learning disability. Be sure to exclude hearing or vision impairment or intellectual disabilities, developmental delays, or emotional behavioral disorder when you want to start looking for problems with academic or learning tasks, discrepancies between expected and actual achievement, and disorder in basic psychological processing. Let's take a brief look at a normal curve for IQ scores. The average human has an IQ or an intelligence quotient of 100. If we move over to the right, we see a score of 115. This score is a high IQ score, if we go to the left, the score will be 85, and the score is a low average IQ. The important thing to remember is the score between 85 and 115 is considered average. Students with learning disabilities tend to fall in the average to high average range when it comes to IQ score. In terms of going 80 or lower IQ range, it's not actually likely for a student with learning disability to be in this region. So why do an IQ test? If you're looking for problems with oral expression, listening comprehension, listening written expression, basic reading skills, and reading comprehension, mathematics calculation, and mathematics reasoning in order to figure out which, if any category would qualify for a learning disability, there used to be a system where we looked at achievement and a discrepancy between IQ scores and achievement. However, this method ended up being statistically flawed, and it was difficult, expensive to use this formula as you had to pay diagnosticians or psychologists in order to do an IQ test. Also, IQ have been found to be unreliable because of reading ability, and unless the student is in the higher grade, this idea of looking at achievement versus an IQ is useless in the early grades. We also want to make sure we avoid a wait to fail method of identification, which is what the system did. We wait for the child to show difficulty for a long period of time before testing them with their ability versus IQ score. Instead of using a wait to fall method, many schools and districts incorporated the use of response to intervention or RTI. But there were a few precautions to make sure you considered there was a little evidence on effectiveness for the identification using RTI, and most of the research is focused only on reading. Many teachers are failing to use evidence-based instructions in Tier 1, which is the general education classroom. Too much variability in what is happening in Tier 2 has been found. So we are not quite sure which interventions are usually working for those small groups. Most RTI models are implemented in early elementary before required skills are more complex, and finally there may be too much recycling between the tiers 1 and 2 when the students really need Tier 3 support, which could be considered special education. Some of the measures used in identifying learning disabilities are the Welsh Learners Intelligence Scale for children, or those with 3 academic assessments: observation, student work, sample analysis, or interviews. So let's look at the prevalence. How often will we see learning disabilities? Approximately 5% of the students between ages of 6 and 17 have identified as being a learning disability, and this prevalence has more than doubled since 1977. Why has this been such an increase? Well, there is a reluctance to blame problems with teaching. We are trying to look away from teaching that's happening within the classroom and focus on the student. There's a social cultural change such as poverty and stress, and also society prefers the label of a learning disabilities over intellectual disability. Boys tend to outnumber girls 3 to 1 in terms of having learning disability. Now let's look at few possible causes. Most causes are unknown, but it is possible that there is a brain of subtle change. Most causes are unknown, but it is possible that there are brain subtle changes. It could be hereditary and passing down from parents, biochemical imbalances in the brain, or possibly from environment, such as prenatal causes, including illness or injury during or before birth. drugs and alcohol use during pregnancy, and RH incompatibility with the mother if left untreated. A few perinatal causes or during birth, including premature or prolonged labor, or a lack of oxygen for the baby and a low weight at birth. A few possible postnatal all causes, including head injuries, nutritional deprivation, poisonous substance such as lead, and child abuse. Few accommodation to help children with learning disabilities include allowing students to demonstrate learning in multiple ways, such as visual, auditory, or tactile. Provide extra time for doing work or tests or assignments. Having a note taker or audio tape classes sessions. Captioned videos use audio textbooks and computer programs that provide speech to text or any type of speech output. A few teaching strategies include making instructions simple and clear, teach students to use memory strategies, use visual representations or mapping, give opportunities to practice what they have learned, teach students to keep track of how they are learning and recording their performance, teach them how to do self-monitoring, also give rewards and encourage praise. Finally, they have always scaffolded instructions. A few more educational consideration for maths. You may want to use explicit teachers-led instructions with immediate error correction. For reading, we can focus on phonics, instructions, and repeated reading in writing. We can look at self-regulated strategy development, and in science and social studies, we can focus on content enhancement and graphic organizers and mnemonics. So, I gotta leave you with a couple of more educational considerations. Direct instruction is a wonderful teaching strategy which includes text analysis, scripted sequences, and fast-paced lessons, drill and practice, and small groups. There also is peer tutoring, where you can incorporate class-wide peer tutoring or peer-assisted learning strategy. Transitions. We want to make sure children with learning disabilities are able to transition from elementary school to middle school, from middle school to high school, and from high school to beyond. So we will be sure to build up their personal perseverance, their ability to set goals, acceptance of weakness and strengths, access to a strong network of social support, extensive educational and intervention, high quality vocational job, training, support environments, supportive work environments, and the ability to take control over their own life. We are looking at the IEP, or the Individualized Educational Plan. We must include transition goals, and we want to make sure that these goals include preparation for the workforce, college, and making informed choices. So in terms of preparation for the workforce, we want to focus on basic skills, functional skills, and work study for their chosen profession. And in terms of preparing for college, we want to look at continued support, consultation, and learning strategies. And as far as making informed choices, we want to make the students help us write the goals for their transition plan and also get their input for the summary of performance. So,